Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part 13 of a series focused on software update management in Configuration Manager. Today's topic will focus on third-party update integration that has been built into Configuration Manager Current Branch. Today's session will actually focus on a technical preview release of Config Manager Current Branch, specifically Technical Preview 1806. And the 1806 release is kind of unique because there were two 1806 releases, the initial one, and then several weeks later, the second one. So this session actually leverages the second release of 1806 Technical Preview for the demos and so on that you will see. All right. So here's the agenda. Basically, I want to talk through what are third-party updates and why we care about them in Configuration Manager, and then specifically in terms of third-party update management, several things we'll talk about: the requirements, basically a look in the rearview mirror in the history of third-party update management, integrated options in Configuration Manager, how to configure those options, actually see this work in action, and then take it to the next level and talk about some advanced ways that you can use this as well. And then we'll wrap up the session talking through a few items, troubleshooting, tips and tricks, some things that, some of these we'll cover kind of as we go along through the session. So what are third-party updates? Essentially, third-party updates are any update that is prepared and made available to you outside of what Microsoft prepares for you. So that could fall into two big categories. Vendors supplied third-party updates, also third-party software update partners. So let's pause here and we'll see more about this in just a minute. The integration of third-party update management into Configuration Manager is not the first place where the ability to manage and integrate third-party updates into Config Manager has been available. There's been a product, an add-on to Configuration Manager for quite some time called System Center Updates Publisher. Right? You'll see a little bit of that as we go through this session. In System Center Update Publishers for years, we've had partner catalogs that you could choose to make available in Configuration Manager. Examples are catalogs from HP and Dell and Adobe, and I think there's a Fujitsu in there, and a couple of more, maybe, right? Not very many, but still, they are there to be able to take advantage of if you would like to use those to keep the products from those vendors up to date using Configuration Manager. In addition, there is the ability, again, using SCUP historically, System Center Updates Publisher, SCUP for short, to allow IT or internal line of business developers to leverage this tool to create software updates for things that might just be things unique to an organization, right? So either way, both of those big umbrellas contain this thing we call third-party updates. So why do we care about third-party updates? Well, Configuration Manager environments throughout the world leverage Configuration Manager every single month to make sure that their Microsoft software is up to date, whether that be Windows itself or Office or endpoint protection or a number of other things, right? All Microsoft supplied. There's lots of processes that are built around making sure this works well, right? So if we can also start to bring in third-party updates and the ability to deploy updates to other non-Microsoft products, it's just going to extend the scope of what Configuration Manager can actually manage, provide additional value to the business for your investment and processes that have been built around Config Manager. It's going to leverage your existing infrastructure. Once you get to the phase of deploying the updates, it's no different at all than deploying standard month-to-month updates, as you'll see. And again, all those processes that are worked out and agreed upon with the business and so forth can just be leveraged, even with these third-party updates. So pretty compelling reasons to consider what third-party update management can bring to you, and especially now that it's integrated, or at least that there is integration with Configuration Manager Current Branch. So what are the requirements for third-party update management, right? Well, you do need to have an available catalog that you can work with. Now, the catalog thing is interesting because we've kind of already talked about the two kinds of updates that you could get, either vendor supplied or custom created. All of those updates, when you create them, are actually, or when you leverage them, are provided in a catalog. Well, there's actually now two formats, if you will, for the catalog. Notice I didn't say schema. The schema of the catalog has not changed, right? But there are some interesting differences between it. So I'll tell you more about that as we go along, but let me introduce a couple of terms, and these are my terms. I've not seen these in official documents, but I kind of refer to the catalogs as the legacy catalog and the updated catalog. So the legacy catalog is something that existed prior to the integrated approach, and frankly prior to SCUP, the latest release of SCUP, right? And again, we'll get into SCUP a little bit in this session. And then there's the updated catalog, right? And as I said that, I remember I just forgot which one I talked about. Either way, let me do it again. So the updated catalog is a new thing that has been introduced with the integration into Configuration Manager, and also is something that comes out of SCUP, what I'm calling 2018, the latest release. The legacy catalog is supported in previous versions of SCUP. So here's the thing. Legacy catalogs are still out there. They're not blocked in when you want to, if you want to import a legacy catalog, which I will do as part of this, right? It's not blocked. You can do that. There are some challenges perhaps that you'll run into with those. So just be real careful. The strong recommendation is to use a catalog adhering to the new standards, right? So if there's a vendor supplied catalog that you see that you want to use in the new integrated standards, really ask that you talk to that vendor about having them adopt the new supported catalog structure so that you can use that thing without any kind of challenges at all, right? So again, additional discussion about the catalog coming up. WSUS obviously is required because that's where our updates come from, but WSUS and SSL specifically. So here's the thing, WSUS, which is also the SUP, obviously. So when I say WSUS, I'm talking about your software update point 2, must be configured to support SSL if the WSUS server, the SUP, is remote from the system where SCUP is hosted, right? Or, I said SCUP here, SCUP's on the brain. So if WSUS is remote from your site server, and it's also true about SCUP, right? If WSUS is remote from your site server or SCUP, then you must have SSL enabled on that SUP. This is not a configuration manager requirement. This is a WSUS requirement. I will show you how to actually configure WSUS in SSL mode, how to validate it. In my case, the WSUS server and SUP are local to my site server, so I don't strictly have to do that. But in order to show you how to do it, I did configure it with SSL. I'll walk you through that, right? And again, this is a WSUS requirement. It's specifically required because there's a portion in this where we need to create what's called the WSUS self-signed cert. Talk to you right about that next under signing certificates. And so in order for WSUS to allow that signing cert to be created and managed on a remote, from a remote system, there has to be a trusted connection that's achieved through SSL. If it's all on the same system, then it's kind of trusted by default, right? So I'll show you how to do all that in just a minute. Okay, signing certificates. So signing certificates are a requirement. If the word certificate causes you concern, don't let it, right? Because integration with Configuration Manager simply means that, again, depending on Configuration Manager can totally handle managing all of your signing certificates. The point is, you need to know that they're necessary, right? So these signing certificates, there can be a couple of different formats. One is you can actually leverage a self-signed cert. That's the easiest way to go, right? If you can't use self-signed certs, then you can acquire a cert that has been been provided by a certificate authority, either your own or a commercial certificate authority, either way, right? And that signing cert is used for signing. That's the point of it. Let me pause there for a minute, kind of explain that. So the whole point of this third-party update integration, and I'll pull in SCUP here as well, is to get these third-party updates configured in WSUS so they can then be made available to Configuration Manager and deployed out to clients, right? Well, part of any update, there's two parts of an update. One is the metadata that describes the update and tells us whether it's applicable and can be installed or is installed and that kind of thing. And the other is the content, right? The content, all of the content, and I'll probably say this again just to drive the point home, all content that's deployed, software update content to clients, is digitally signed. It has to be. If it's not digitally signed, it will be rejected by the client. Can't install, right? The Microsoft updates are all digitally signed by Microsoft. The clients will trust that digital signature by default, right? But that's not true for third-party updates necessarily, right? So there has to be a way to sign the content specific to these third-party updates in such a way that we know who signed it and we can apply that certificate throughout our infrastructure so that it's trusted when it arrives finally on the client to be installed, right? So again, two parts of an update. There's the metadata, there's the content, right? And so specifically, when you're going to deploy content, we have to sign that content, right? And this is a good place to say, you don't necessarily have to have content for every update, right? Just because you have the update metadata doesn't mean you have the content. Just like whenever you do a software update, just a standard Microsoft update, you go into the all updates list and you pick which ones you want to deploy, and then we download the content there and so on, right? You're going to choose which third-party updates you want to download content for. And there's a process for that I'll explain to you. And then as part of that, the content itself that is retrieved is signed by that WSUS signing certificate and made available to the infrastructure. And then because of that cert being in place across the enterprise, which I'll explain to you, then that content can install. It's trusted at that point. So that's the role and why it's very vital for that signing cert to be available and in place. And again, I'll probably repeat parts of that a couple of times just to make sure that we understand that point as we go through. Okay, so let's put a pause in the integration discussion and kind of building up to that. And let's take a look back real quick. I mentioned at the beginning that there have been mechanisms in place to allow working with third-party updates for many, many years now, right? That mechanism is called System Center Updates Publisher, right? So if you look at our documentation, you will see the definition of System Center Updates Publisher, again, SCUP for short, is that System Center Updates Publisher is a standalone tool that enables independent software vendors, OEMs, or IT administrators to import, manage, and deploy software update definitions which can be deployed with System Center Configuration Manager, right? So there's really 4 phases that you think of trying to work through with a third-party update. And this is true for SCUP. It's also true for the integration pieces, right, in Configuration Manager. First, you need to import your updates from external catalogs, non-Microsoft sources. This would be those catalogs provided by the vendors that I showed you, HP, Dell, whoever else, Adobe, right? Non-Microsoft sources. Those catalogs could be ones that are self-generated as well, right? Once you have the catalogs imported, you may want to modify the definitions and include applicability and deployment metadata. Now, that is something you can uniquely do with SCUP. That is not something you can do with update integration, right? So we're talking about SCUP right now, and we're talking about what you can do with SCUP. Third, export updates to external catalogs, right? With SCUP, you can do that. And then finally, publish the updates to an update server, the select updates that you care about from a catalog to the update server. Definitely something you can do with SCUP. So there have been 3 releases of SCUP historically. SCUP 4.5, that was the initial release, and it was released in December of 2008, specifically December 15th. of 2008. Now, one little factoid here that's more trivia than anything, really. It's not really relevant to the discussion, but it might be interesting, right? So SCUP 4.5 was a release of SCUP that required that you had a traditional SQL server database engine that you could then use to host the SCUP database, right? That was unique to SCUP 4.5. The next release of SCUP was SCUP 2011. That was released on May 16th of 2016, right? So a couple of things about SCUP 2011. Updated UI, right? So the UI kind of, to me, became a little bit more navigable. I mean, pretty easy to make the transition between SCUP 4.5 and 2011, but it was an updated UI, added support for Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8.1, Server 2008, 2008 R2, 2012, and 2012 R2. So SCUP 2011 was a tool supported for use on Configuration Manager 2007, 2012, and 2012 R2. Then, the most recent release, SCUP 2018. Now, let me pause there for a minute. If you go grab the latest SCUP download, you will not find anything called SCUP 2018. It's not called that, right? For example, if you go install and find a version of SCUP 2011 and install that, it's called SCUP 2011. But if you install SCUP 2018, it's not called SCUP 2018, right? I call it that just to distinguish it. So it was released March 21 this year, 2018. And specifically added support for Windows 10, Server 2016. Now supports, this version of SCUP supports Config Manager 2012, 2012 R2, supported any supported version of Config Manager Current Branch, and then Config Manager LTSB, right? Again, unique to this release of SCUP is that now SCUP supports the new update catalog format that I keep hinting to, and I'll tell you more about, as we go along. All right. Now, still thinking about SCUP, looking back again, what does SCUP do? Just calling back out the processes. So three, I broke it down into three here. I talked about it in four the last time. But obtain, import third-party catalogs, author custom updates, manage and publish updates, right? Does all of those, right? Helps with all of those. And then specific components. You do need a certificate. Again, don't be nervous about certificates, because with the integration, certificates are easy. And even without integration, certificates are really easy with SCUP. But again, just saying this a few times to make sure that I'm communicating. So certificates, there are two kinds. There are self-signed certs. There's certs generated by certificate authorities and leverage. These are used to make it possible to sign content and stage it in WSUS, right? And also, so these certificates are used and needed on WSUS. I'll show you this. I'll show you where they are. They're also used and needed on the client to build that full end-to-end trust relationship. There's the update catalog components. Again, vendor supplied, custom created, two different versions of catalog, the legacy and the updated. And then you have individual updates that are within the catalog that you need to manage and figure out which ones apply to your environment, or create them yourself if you want to. Now, there's two big kinds, two ways we'll talk about these custom updates, the individual updates, right? Whether they be in a custom catalog or a vendor supplied catalog. One is to refer to the updates as metadata only updates. So I've already alluded to this a little bit, but metadata only simply means that you don't have any content associated with that update yet. You haven't deployed the update. You don't need the content until you deploy the update or want to deploy the update, right? The other is the metadata plus content, in the SCUP world referred to as full content, right? And that's where you have added the content. You've decided you want to deploy the update, right? And then finally, there are some group policy settings, one in particular, that you need to have on your systems that are going to be receiving these updates. I'll actually show you the update or the group policy settings here in a little bit whenever we get to the client, right? And I demo that. All right, so that's all SCUP stuff. Let's compare that to integration, right? So the same processes apply for integration. One of the processes that you need to do is obtain and import third-party updates. Fully supported to do that through the integration components in Configuration Manager. Another thing you need to do is manage and publish the updates that you have imported. Fully supported to do that through integration in Config Manager. And then the third thing, being able to author custom updates. There is no ability to author and create third-party updates in Configuration Manager. If you want to do that, you can absolutely still do it. Just use SCUP to enable that, right? And then in terms of components, right? Yeah, we still need certificates. The beautiful news here is you can just let Config Manager manage this thing for you, and it will do it very well. You don't have to worry about provisioning those certs yourself. You don't need to worry about provisioning, jumping ahead the group policy settings yourself. The Config Manager system will do that for you if you let it, right? And then the update catalog, right? Still, you can get those and work with those in Config Manager, no problem. The individual updates, right? Definitely supported and worked with here, no problem at all. You do have the concept of metadata and then adding content to replace the metadata if you want to deploy something, which I will show you, right? And on the individual updates, just a note, with third-party update integration, you can go through and deploy multiple updates from the third party, your custom catalogs, right? But one thing that you can't do is select individual updates from the catalog by themselves. Let me say that a different way, right? Make sure I'm clear about this. So one of the things that you will see is if you select a catalog of updates, that catalog may contain hundreds or maybe thousands of updates. I believe, if I remember right, the HP catalog that's there by default in this technical preview build contains something like, I don't know, several thousand updates. I forget the number, and I could be wrong on that, but that's what comes to mind. You have, through the integration option, you have no ability to pick and choose which of those thousands of updates actually come in to Config Manager. When you import the catalog, all of those updates get loaded into WSUS and then potentially, or will show up in Config Manager, right? If you select them in products, which I'll show you later. That has, anyone who's gone through working with Config Manager and kind of seen the growth of the WSUS updates catalog and seen some scanning errors that might happen because of not managing the WSUS catalog size and keeping it clean and so forth, we'll know that adding a lot of updates to the update catalog may or may not be something you want to do, right? It's probably, and it's not that, as long as you keep WSUS catalog clean and you have processes to maintain it, it's really not that big a deal. It just takes time to load all of those into WSUS, right? But maybe you look at this catalog, and here's not a bad idea, right? Maybe you keep SCUP around and you load the catalog in first and you just kind of look at what's in there and leverage SCUP to determine, hey, is there anything in this third-party catalog that I even care about, right? That I might want to deploy, and if so, what, right? And then if there's nothing there, then you don't put anything in your Config Manager WSUS database SUP that you then have to worry about increasing the size beyond what you want, right? Because here's the deal. You cannot pick and choose which updates from that catalog get added to WSUS. If you import the catalog, every one of those updates come in, as already mentioned. If you want to pick and choose specific updates that get added to WSUS, you can do that, but it has to be done through SCUP, right? That's the only way. So in other words, if you have 5 updates out of that 4,000 that you care about, maybe it's a better choice to load that update data to WSUS using SCUP instead of full integration in Config Manager, right? Just throwing that out there as an idea. And finally, ISV sync agent. So this is something that is unique to Configuration Manager. So the ISV sync agent is a thread of the executive that will run on the top level software update point in the hierarchy or on the standalone primary, right? So this component will be present on every installed SUP in the environment, but if it's not the top level SUP in the environment, it will just be an inactive thread, right? So you'll see more about the ISV sync agent and how it works and so forth coming up. All right, so let's get to the fun stuff. Let's kind of demo and walk through configuring this thing. So I want to do three things here. First, I want to talk you through how you configure SSL with your WSUS server. Again, in my environment, everything is on one virtual machine, so I don't strictly have to do this, but I did it just to show you how to do it. Then we'll talk about how you go about configuring your site server to support third-party update management, or integrate third-party updates into the environment. And then finally, talk about what's required on your Configuration Manager client. So let me pull in my site server here. There it is. All right, let me launch my console. Actually, before I launch the console, let me just go into talking about SSL and WSUS, right? So again, this requirement for SSL is not a Configuration Manager requirement. It's a requirement of the WSUS API that a remote system, when trying to publish certificates and so on, has to be trusted, and the SSL channel allows that trust. And let me just say this. Even though your WSUS server may need to be, or your software update point may need to be configured for SSL, that does not mean that your clients have to access the software update point through SSL. Your clients can remain just standard port 80 traffic, or I guess 8530 traffic, no problem, right? It's just that server connection to WSUS. All right, so let's just get into this. So now the first thing you need, I'm not going to show you because there's ways to do this and there's lots of documentation about it. But in order to configure WSUS for supporting SSL, you do need a certificate that can be used for server authentication. And there's multiple ways to get it. Just having your own certificate authority and using our documentation to go grab that is great, right? Or there's third-party certificates that can be used, or commercial certificate authority generated certificates that can be used, and so on. So let's just assume that we have that cert. And so once we have it, in order to implement it, we're going to go to Windows Administration Tools and go to IIS, and then specifically expand and go to our sites and the WSUS website. And so I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm going to edit bindings, and I'm going to go to 8531, which is my SSL port. I'm going to edit that, and you notice that I already have a cert created here. So the processes of getting that cert, made it available. It's in the certificate store on this server, right? Because I've asked for it and I've enrolled for it, so it's available here. And so I can see that cert on this list, and you might not know, which cert to choose. Some of these have names. This one just has a long identifier, right? So I can view the cert, and I can see who generated it, what its purpose is. In my case, I need to know mainly what the template was that was used to create it. So this is my Config Manager lab server template, and I can look for enhanced key usage. It's for server authentication. So I know this is the cert that I want. So I've selected it, and I've hit OK and close. Now, that enables WSUS administration website to be able to leverage SSL for different sites that might need it, right? So specifically for enabling SSL, in this scenario, you need to make sure, I'll show you this one, right? You need to make sure this API remoting site is configured to use SSL. And you do that by just saying require SSL. And then you need to do that as well for client web service, and then DSS auth web service, and then server sync web service, and then simple auth web service, right? The other ones, just leave them as they are, right? And then you're done. And then after that, you just need to go configure Config Manager, the software update point, to leverage to leverage SSL. So let's let the console load, and we'll go do that. All right, coming up. All right, so you can see Config Manager 1806 technical preview, just like I told you. And also, I'll just show you the version number while I'm here. So this is the version that I'm using, right, for this. And so I'll go to the administration node and go under site configuration and go under servers and site system roles, and then go to my software update point here. And then just require SSL. So that tells Config Manager to communicate with that software update point using SSL, right? And so how do I validate that the system is using SSL? First, I need to validate that WSUS itself is configured to use SSL properly. So one way to do that, let me do this one, is in the registry. Regedit 32, great. And I'm actually already on the key. So here's the key: local machine software, Microsoft Update Services, server, and then setup. And there's two things to look at here. First is the port number. You see that it's using port 8531, so that's SSL. And then down here, using SSL is set to 1, which means it is using SSL, right? So let's go ahead and close out of that. And the other thing, man, I think it may be out of the rollover log right now, but let's just see. If you go and look right away, let me see if I can find it. When you do that, you can see in the WCM log that it uses SSL, or is checking SSL configuration, whatever it is. So let's see if I still have it. WCM. Oh, sorry, that is like, where is it? That's a network path standby. Program files, config manager, logs. All right, so let's go to WCM. Let's go to the rollover log and just see if I can find it. I'll open it with Notepad. Apologies. Here. So, okay, I found it. So here, at least I'm seeing that you're connecting to WSUS, you're using SSL, just a little visual indicator that Config Manager is trying to do that. You can look at some of the other logs and status messages and so on and validate that Config Manager is able to successfully be working with WSUS and so forth, right? So that is making sure WSUS is set to use SSL. Right? Okay. Now, what about the Config Manager site itself? How do we go enable third-party update integration to work with your Config Manager site? Again, stay in administration, pretty easy. Go to sites, and then on the site code, under configure component software update point. And you'll notice that there's a tab here called third-party updates. And so I can click on that, and you're presented with this page. Now, let me just call out. The current production release of Config Manager current branch is 1802. If you go to the same location in 1802, then you will, in fact, see a third-party updates tab. It will not look like this, right? Because it's not enabled with all of this stuff that I'm talking about yet in 1802 production build. Okay, so a couple of things to do here. First, enable third-party software updates. So basically, whenever you enable this option, it allows you to start to introduce third-party updates into the environment, just like we talked about. And then the second option that you need to do is decide what do you want to do with your WSUS signing certificate, right? So this, again, we've talked about this. This is the cert that's used to sign the content that you will ultimately publish to WSUS and deploy through the enterprise and try to install in your client. So this is where you decide, what is that cert going to be like? Is it going to be a Config Manager managed certificate, where Config Manager just takes care of all of it and places it in the appropriate certificate stores on the WSUS server and also on your clients and adjust the GPO settings and so on? Or is it going to be something that you manually manage yourself, right? Certainly letting Config Manager do it is easier. So if you can, definitely recommend doing that. So in my case, I've said, yeah, Config Manager can go ahead and manage that cert. So great, and then I hit OK. Now, how do I know that Config Manager has actually done or is actively managing my certs? Well, the first thing I can do is stop off under my certificate store and then scroll to the bottom and look, and you'll see that I have my WSUS published WSUS Publisher self-signed cert. It is not blocked. It's active, not expired. etc. So I know that Config Manager knows that it needs to manage that cert, right? Now that I'm telling Config Manager to manage the cert, Config Manager will be checking to make sure that cert is there, to make sure that it's provisioned correctly, and so on. Now, the way that it checks, the way that I can validate it, is if I go to the logs. Here, let me go to the right logs folder this time, and go to my WSync Manager log. I think I have to use the old one here too. Open with Notepad. Open with Notepad. All right. And then I search. I'm just going to look for checking WSUS for third party. That should be enough. Maybe it's rolled out. Let's see if it's in the newer log. Yeah, let's see if it's in the newer log. Interesting. May not be there in this, but let's see. Checking for WSUS. Let's just do that. Checking WSUS. Okay, there it is. Right, so checking WSUS for third-party signing certificate. You can see that it's doing it, getting it, blah, blah, blah. You can see that it actually found the cert, it's using it correctly, and so on. So you can use WSync MGR as a way to validate that we're interacting with WSUS correctly. And then finally, the last level of confirmation is you can go into your certificate stores. And here, I'm just looking in my certificates MMC. There's actually 3 places that you should expect to find the WSUS cert. First is the WSUS store. Now, let me call out that you may go to your WSUS server, your software update point, and look in certificates. You may not have the WSUS store there, right? And if you don't, that's fine. Go ahead and work through the integration process and build the cert, letting Config Manager manage the cert if you can. And the WSUS store will get created, and that cert will be present in the WSUS store. If it's not there and you're manually managing the cert, you'll need to create it and you'll need to put the cert in there yourself, right? But in my certificate store, here's my WSUS self-signed cert, right? And then there's 2 other places. It needs to be in trusted root certificate authorities as well. And so it is WSUS publishers self-signed. And then also under trusted publishers, and it is. And the beauty is Config Manager does all of that for you when you allow Config Manager to manage the cert. Otherwise, you have to do it yourself. And it's not hard to do, right? But it's just easier to let Config Manager do it if you can, right? Okay, so that's how you validate it on the server side. Now, so that's servers. Let's talk about the client. So I'm going to go ahead and proactively pull in a client that I'm going to use for demo. And just to show you, right, for my technical preview lab, I just have a couple of Windows 7 machines hanging around. Let me pull that up. Yeah, I need to authenticate, or whatever that is called. Slipping my mind. Anyway, so a couple of places. One, let's just kind of cover what we just talked about. On the client needs to trust these certs just like the server does. So let me go into, this is GPO, I'll add the cert snap in. Let's go up, yeah, let's add the snap in. So certificates, add computer account next. Okay, good. So say okay, and now at the bottom I have my cert snap in. There's only 2 stores this needs to be in on the client. The first is the same, Trusted Root Certificate Authorities, and it's here, right? And then also Trusted Publishers, and it's here, right? So now, Config Manager does this too. I kind of jumped ahead of myself. Let me move this out of the way. The way you tell Config Manager to manage the clients is you then have to go to client settings. And under client settings, go to software updates. And at the very bottom, you will have the flag enable third-party software update management. Just say yes. When you do that, Config Manager will go out to the clients and enable that cert, right, in the certificate stores. And then also, there are a couple of, well, one really, GPO setting you need to concern yourself with. And so specifically under the Windows Update node, so this is under, let's just show you, under Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, and then Update Services, or Windows Update. It's this GPO setting specifically, right? Allow signed updates from an intranet Microsoft Update source location. You have to turn that on because that's where you're publishing the update, right? This one should be on all clients because that's how Config Manager is able to apply software updates, right? But this one has to be turned on too. The client will automatically have the set whenever you have the option setting client settings to allow for the client to be managed, right? Now, other little indicators, and this one you might not see because it might have rolled out of the logs, but let me see if it's still in mine. So if you go under CCM and logs, and I think this will be in the rollover log, updates deployment specifically, here. Okay, so it looks like it's all in one. Let's see if I can find it. Open with Notepad. If I can't, no big deal, but at least I'll show it to you if I can. So I'm going to look for a line. Let's see if I can find this. C update deployment agent. And then see if that's enough. Nope. C update deployment agent. Make sure I'm spelling it right. : get is third party update enabled. Okay, yeah, it's not going to find it. That's okay. You'll see that in this log right after the client starts to apply it, right? So updates deployment. Yeah. Anyways, it's not there. But another place you can validate it is I'm going to move over to my site server for this because I have WMI Explorer on the site server and it's just easier to use. So I'm going to go run WMI Explorer as an admin, and I'm going to connect to my client that I was just on. That's the client I was just on it. I'm going to go to root CCM, and I'm going to go to policy, and then machine, and then actual config. All right, and then I'm going to look for the CCM underscore software update client config class. Software update client config should be right here. Okay. So, and there it is. And so right here, I have, where is it? Third party, right here, third party updates enabled true. So I know that third party updates have been turned on for my client. And yeah, that's a pretty easy way to sweep through and make sure the client configure. First, you shouldn't have to do that because just turning on the client settings to say enable third party updates should take care of it. But to validate it, if you need to, that's a really good way to do it. So we'll come back to my clients and so on in just a minute, right? Okay, so that's getting things set. That's kind of configuring so that things are set. Now, let's kind of see how this works. Let's look at this in action. How does it work? And so kind of at the high level before we get into the demos and to try to illustrate how this works and how you're going to see different things happening in the demo, I put together this flowchart. And it's a little bit busy, but hopefully walks through in a pretty direct way what will happen. So let's just kind of walk through it. So first, the components of the flowchart. We've got our location where we're going to retrieve third-party update catalogs and content. That's going to be hosted by the vendor, either maybe Adobe or HP or whoever, right? Or your own place where you will publish the catalogs that you build for yourself. Then there's the standard Microsoft Updates location, which will never contain third-party updates, right? All the updates come from here or here once they're published. Okay, so here's kind of the process. So an administrator is going to go in and enable third-party update management, as we just talked about, and then choose whether or not to allow Config Manager to automatically manage the WSUS signing certificate, right? Just like we talked about. The second phase of that is the third-party signing certificate either is manually or automatically created and installed on your WSUS subserver, right? I don't know why I have either there. Either way, that's step two. Step three, the administrator is going to subscribe. You haven't seen this yet. The administrator is going to subscribe to desired third-party update catalog. So all of this stuff forward you haven't seen yet, right? That's step 3. Step 4, and I kind of group all of these together in terms of subscribing to third-party catalogs. The subscribe third-party update catalog is downloaded. That's step 4. It's going to be downloaded and processed on your site server, right? Now, ultimately, as you'll see, right, it's going to make its way. This third-party update content will make its way to WSUS. I'm kind of breaking this out. That's why I drew the box around it. Kind of these processes all happen as part of a wizard kind of deal, but I'm splitting them out for you. So part 4 is we're just going to download that third-party update content to our site server, right? And then as a part of the wizard that is being run while we select our third-party update catalog, the administrator is going to approve the install of certificates downloaded as part of the third-party catalog, right? And then once you finish with the wizard, then the full catalog begins to synchronize from the third-party catalog provider. The update metadata is published to WSUS in full, right? After that initial download, then the catalog will be synchronized weekly, or you can always go in and trigger it manually. So step 6 is where we're taking this downloaded catalog from step 4, and actually I do show it here as well, step 6, kind of taking all of that, downloading it, processing it, and moving it over to WSUS. Now this, I might change this a little bit, but the point is, you download the content, the catalog to the server processes it, and ultimately pushes it over and stores it to WSUS. Now let me call back what I said earlier. When you choose a catalog this way, it works great, just like I explained. You cannot pick and choose individual updates from the catalog to synchronize to WSUS at this stage. The entire catalog will be loaded to WSUS. The metadata for every update in the catalog will be loaded to WSUS at this time, right? If you need to have just individual updates from that catalog loaded to WSUS and not the whole catalog, then you need to use Skype, right? Again, just repeating that because hopefully hearing it multiple times will help clarify. And then step 7. So once you get all this done, once the catalog synchronizes, wait for that sync to complete. And you can actually monitor this in the ISV log. I'll show that to you as we go along. And then finally, initiate a traditional config manager software update sync. That's step 7, right? And since part of that sync is always going to go to Microsoft Updates, I do show that connection. But the main thing that we care about right now, we've published all of this information from the catalog to WSUS. This sync will let config manager learn about it. Very important, because step 8 is that you're going to go into the SUP settings for the site and choose those new products that you've synchronized so that you can then start to get the updates themselves from WSUS, right? So once you enable the products that now show up after the sync completes, then, and probably again I should have put wait for sync to complete here between 7 and 8, right? Then you're going to have another sync. Initiate your traditional software update sync again. That's step 9. And I show it kind of end to end. Now at this stage, you've already subscribed to the products. Now you're going to actually transfer detail about the products that you care about, the third-party products you've selected. And now it will show up in the config manager database in the all software updates view, right? So next, locate third-party updates of interest in the all updates view. This is like normal. If you want to hone in just on the third-party updates, you can filter by vendor, and then you can look through the updates and decide which ones you want to publish. And so that's step 11. You will publish those updates of interest to WSUS. Now, what does it mean to publish? That simply means that you're going to go out and get the content, step 11, from your third-party catalog provider and post that content over to WSUS, right? So again, the initial sync of the catalog has 0 content. The content comes when you select individual updates and publish them to WSUS, right? So the thing that at least I want to clarify, it may not be confusing, that first process where you retrieve the catalog and do step 6 to load that full catalog to WSUS, that could be argued in the SCUP world, it's kind of referred to as publishing that data to WSUS. This, you don't really see this, kind of it just happens behind the scenes. So this is what we call in the integrated world publishing, right? But what that really means is we're choosing an update that we know we want to deploy, and we're saying, okay, make that available for deployment for me. So in other words, publish that so that I can deploy it, right? And so what that does, it goes and gets the content, makes it available in WSUS, loads it into WSUS, and we should be good to go. Then, yeah, we need to initiate a traditional software update sync again. Because what happens here is basically there's a flag, which I'll show you, associated with every third-party update called metadata only, that by default will be set to yes. If an update is metadata only, you cannot deploy it, right? It has to be set to no. So this step 12 sync will basically now tell Config Manager, oh yeah, this update, I knew about it, but it's changed from metadata only yes to metadata only no. And so now I can deploy it, right? And then step 13, you're going to go do, wait for your sync to complete step 12. Got this out of order. So this should be step 14. I realize I made some mistakes here. The next step, deploy your third-party updates as per normal. Part of that, you're going to create or choose internet as the download location for the deployment. The content's already staged here, so it doesn't have to go download it again. It just needs to know that it's pulling it across and so on. So that's the last step. And sorry for the out of order or having duplicate numbers here. Anyway, hopefully you get the idea. And just wanted to walk through that because now I'm going to show it to you in action. I'm going to do this 2 ways, right? First, we'll just walk through it. I want to subscribe to the third-party catalogs, synchronize the third-party catalogs, publish the third-party updates, and then deploy it, right? So let me pull back in my site server, and we'll walk through this. Okay. So, let me open up the site. So basically, I'm going to navigate to my software library and down to software updates, and now to the third-party software updates catalog. So you see that I have 2 third-party software update catalogs here, right? Ignore the one from Adobe right now. We'll get to that a little bit later. Pretend like all you see is HP, because if you go to your technical preview at the same level I'm at, right, all you will see is HP. That's the only third-party catalog that is available in the console by default, right? So what I need to do is choose that I want to subscribe to whatever third-party catalogs are already here, right? So I'll go through a process where I right-click and subscribe to catalog. It'll take me through a wizard that will help me subscribe to the catalog. I've already done it, so I'm not going to do it again. But essentially, there's a few steps here. As you go through the wizard, as you complete the wizard, the subscribed catalog will download to your site server. Also, there's a step in here where it says review and approve. This is actually reviewing. I'll walk through it a little bit. It wouldn't hurt anything. So it's going to download. Already has it, so not a big deal. And the next thing is review and approve the cert. So I can view the cert. I can see what it is and say, okay, I'm good. I approve the cert, right? I have to look at it before you can approve it. And then it goes and starts the download and so on, which I've already done, so I'm not going to do it again. So that cert is part of the catalog. And just kind of teasing what I'll talk about in a minute more, that's one of the fundamental changes in the catalog format is the way certs are handled, right? And frankly, why you want to use the updated catalog format if you can get an update in that, a catalog in that format. Okay, and so once you go through that wizard and say okay, then 2 things are happening. One is the certificate or certificates that you've approved as part of the process are now staged under the security certificates node right here. So you'll see a number of different HP certs that I've approved, and they're all in here, and they're all available to be used and unblocked, no problem, right? The other thing that's happening is you will start to see that the updates themselves are being synchronized from the vendor location. So if I look at the ISV updates sync agent, and I want to look at the oldest one, I think this one, open it with, again, Notepad. Notepad's my friend. You can see that we're going through and logging, and then let me scroll on down where I get to some of the synchronization work that I was doing. Yeah, so then I just start to synchronize. As I complete the wizard, I start to synchronize all these different updates, and you can see there are a bunch of them. In fact, down here, let me see. I think it'll tell me how many total items that it synchronized. Still running. Let's see, it rolled over, so I think this one is next. Let's see. I won't chase this too far if it keeps going, but I'm just curious. Well, anyway, so it's thousands. I think it's in the 4,000 range, right? But that will happen. So when you subscribe to the catalog, you definitely want to monitor this log and wait for that sync to complete. There is no other way, really, that I've found anyway, to see that that sync is complete outside of monitoring this log. Because if you do anything before that sync is complete, you're just going to have to do it again, right? And so once you have that sync done, we will synchronize weekly from that point, or you can always come here and sync now, right? No problem, right? So that will always go back to the vendor and get the latest catalog or check if there is a later catalog and so on, right? Now, when you're downloading, there's a lot of data being shifted around and moved and worked with and so forth. So let me just go here because that's not a log. I want to go back here, really. There's a folder under the config manager install called ISV temp. And I believe it's, I don't know, I haven't tried this with my software update point remote. And so it might be hosted here only because the software update point is here, don't know. But either way, there's a folder called ISV temp. And this is the temporary location. As software updates are being downloaded, that catalog from the third-party vendor, they're being stored here and things are shuffled through here. And there's nothing in this folder now because it's all been processed. But you would see a lot of activity here. And another way to know things are kind of working. So one question that might come up is, hey, there's a lot of content left over in this folder. Shouldn't be really, but you know, maybe there is a lot of content left over in this folder. Do I need to do anything to clean it up? And the answer is, nah, you really don't. Shouldn't be necessary. There is a process that will come along and clean up any data that's left here, if there is. Now, if you really need to, you can go manually clean this up. Just the key is stop the executive first, then clean it up, and then restart the executive and should be good, right? Okay, so now that I've subscribed to the catalog, right, I'm waiting for that download of the catalog to complete, right? And now, once that completes, and I'm able to move through this a lot quicker than probably you will, because I've already done a lot of this. Once you're sure that that update has completed, then what you need to do is go and initiate a software update point traditional sync right here, right? Because one of the things you want, or the thing that you want next, is to make sure that the products that you just added to WSUS through that download of the catalog are available in Configuration Manager. All right, so I've already done that, and I'm just going to go show you what I mean. So under Administration then, under Sites here, and then Config Manager Site Components, once you do your traditional software update point sync after you've loaded that subscribed catalog, then on the Products tab, we will know about these new update products that I can then choose, right? Again, ignore Adobe for now. We're just focused on this one, right? So I've chosen all of them. So now that I've chosen all of them, guess what I have to do? I have to go do, yes, another sync, right? Synchronize software updates again, right? Now, so this is the process. Now that I've actually told Config Manager what update products I now care to look at, now the next sync is actually going to pull over those software updates and add them to the mix so that I can start working with them, right? So let me show you. So I've actually already got all this done. So once you do that sync I just talked about, wait for it to complete, and then you can come into the All Software Updates view, and to make it easier, go to Vendor, right, and hit Add. And I'm just going to choose HP because that's the one we're working about. We're ignoring Adobe right now, and hit Search. This will focus my search results on just the HP stuff that I've pulled in, right? And I've hit my 1,000 limit. I'm just curious. Let's see how many updates it shows once it goes ahead and churns through this. Yeah, it's going to be quite a number. I think it's going to be 4,000. Yeah, over 4,000. So a ton of updates in that catalog, right? But now you can see them. These are the ones that came in. Having the metadata only, right? Loading all these updates into WSUS. You might think, well, I don't need all these updates in WSUS. You may not. And if you don't, use SCUT to selectively pick the ones. But it may be that you want to see, what systems in my environment need any of these. And so this is a great way to just see, do any systems in your environment need these? Now, I'm using VMs, so they won't need any VHP updates. But it's kind of normal navigation mostly from here, right? Not totally, but mostly. And so the next step would be to identify, and I'll tell you, I'm not going to do this here. I'm going to do this in a minute with the Adobe stuff that I'm telling you to ignore right now. But the next step in the process would be to identify any updates that you want to deploy to your environment, right? And then publish those updates. So there's a couple of items that I've added to my view, metadata only, and what the vendor is, right? So metadata only, I told you, in order to deploy an update, it has to be metadata only, no. So if I go and I try to deploy this right now, I click it and you're like, oh, well, the wizard pops up. Look, I'm going to be able to do this. Then I just go forward and I choose and I hit OK and next, and nope, can't do it because the content is not present, right? So in this case, it's metadata only, meaning the content isn't present. I can't deploy an update that there's no content. So the metadata only has to be no, right? The way that I change this metadata only to no is that I will go publish my third-party update. Now, I guess I'll do this. I don't have a system at all that can actually benefit from this, but I'll go publish it just to show you the wizard. Fine, so I can review and publish the content. Great, hit OK. And so that was real exciting, wasn't it? Right? Because there's really no visual cue outside of metadata only being no. And also the icons are important, that will tell you that the update is published and ready to deploy. Right? The only way you really know is to refresh this view after waiting a period of time to let you see if things are good to go, or you can monitor it in the log. Our friend, the ISV updates log, will be recording this. So let's go get it. In this case, let's get the latest one, which is here. And I'll even try trace and see if it'll come up. For some reason, it's not loading anything but the most recent line. So here it is. So it pulled up. Yeah, Sync successfully added the content to WSUS. So this one now should be metadata only no. And also the icon should change. Let me just load this in Notepad so you can see the whole conversation. Yeah. Do it again. Open with Notepad. There. Go to the bottom. And so there it is. Here's the file. It's downloading from HP, and here it is. It's successfully loaded. So now, when I go and I search again, that icon should be green, and metadata only should be no. And so maybe it's still processing through a bit. That's interesting. Let me sort this. Ah, there we go. Okay. So I just had to filter it back. So metadata only no, the icon's green. That one's good to go. Right now I don't have a need to deploy it because I don't have any systems that actually will accept it. And let me call your attention back as well. This publication process, I talked about it before and I showed it in the flowchart, but seeing it like this hopefully cements it a bit better. What this is doing is actually retrieving the content from whatever location is supplied in this catalog and publishing it to WSUS. But the content as it's downloaded is not something that can actually be used in the environment yet. It needs to be signed in a way that is recognizable and trusted by the environment. That's where that WSUS signing certificate comes into play. Specifically, when that content is downloaded, it is signed with that signing cert and then published into or stored inside WSUS. And then now when I go deploy it across my enterprise, since all of my entities trust that signing certificate, that software update goes through no problem at all, right? So now what I would do is I would just go through the standard deployment process like any other update I would ever do. And it would go and get the content, no problem. So I'm not actually going to do the deployment here because, again, this is an HP update. I'm using VMs. It would not really be applicable anywhere, but you would, again, deploy as normal. The one thing that might come up, and I'll show you this, I think, with the Adobe, is one of the questions is, where do we download the content? And one of the options is internet. It's what you normally choose, right? Because that's where you're going to go get it, from the software update or from Microsoft updates. Same thing here. Choose internet. And since that's already published in WSUS, we just go grab it from there, right? You can actually watch this in Patch Downloader Log, the downloading of the third-party updates from WSUS, validating the certs, all of that kind of thing if you want to, right? So pretty cool. All right, let me pull this back out and move on. Okay. So a word about the SCUP catalogs, and I want to show you one more scenario. So two kinds of catalogs, again, my terms, legacy and updated. The updated catalog is what you really want, right? The legacy catalog is what a lot of vendors are still using today. They haven't yet updated. I don't know the status of them, but we only show the HP catalog in the technical preview, and so the other vendors, I would think that would mean they haven't updated their catalog quite yet. Right? But here's the key difference. Between the legacy format and the updated format, the actual database schema of these catalogs hasn't changed. It's just the CAB file format itself, right? So in the legacy catalog, basically you have the catalog itself has a cert, but there's a number of other certs that are needed with the updates in the catalog. So whenever you choose, so anyone who's used SCUP, right? Just kind of going on this tangent for a minute. Anyone who's used SCUP with some of these vendor-supplied catalogs, whenever you import that vendor-supplied catalog, you get prompted many, many times potentially to approve certificates, because as you're publishing updates through SCUP, we're having to go retrieve the cert and publish it and retrieve it and approve it and retrieve it and approve it, right? Because it's kind of external to the catalog. In the updated format, the certs are all within the catalog. So when you approve the catalog, you have approved these certs, essentially. And these are the certs that are kind of validating the CAD files. And anyway, I won't get into the cert processing because frankly, I don't know it real well. But that's kind of a very simplified key difference, right? The legacy file format didn't include certs inside at all. Certs were pulled off of the downloaded binaries, and then the user individually prompted in the UI for SCUP specifically to approve each. Here with the updated catalog, you just do it once, right? Now, why do I show you this? Because I told you I would, and then also because of this scenario, advanced, right? So here I do want to go back through and show you a couple of things in demo form again, specifically using the Adobe catalog, which is a version, a catalog version that is not the updated version. It's a legacy version. So I'm doing that on purpose, right? Before I get there though, so in terms of just a couple of topics on the advanced side, right? In terms of custom updates and catalogs, we've talked about so far vendor supplied catalogs. You can absolutely import your own catalog in SCUP. In fact, that's what I'm going to do in order to get the Adobe catalog into SCUP. Into Config Manager, right? If you build your own update catalog with SCUP, then you can import it into Config Manager, no problem at all, right? One thing, just little kind of probably very detailed point that not really all that useful to mention here, but just to mention it, whenever you're building the catalog, you do have to supply a download location so that whenever Config Manager goes to retrieve that content during import, it knows where to go. You have to put that in URL form, right? And it has to be SSL, right? Just a requirement. And then in terms of publishing and deploying, really works very, very similarly. Now, a word about SCUP, System Center Updates Publisher. I've kind of alluded to it along the way, and the point that I'm trying to call out here is that SCUP, absolutely, it's good to know about integration and leverage that integration. Makes life a whole lot easier with the third-party updates management being integrated into Config Manager. There's absolutely still a role for SCUP, right? So just a few examples. Do you need finite control over your updating process? Well, SCUP is where you need to be if that's the case. Do you have advanced scenarios involving third-party or custom updates? If so, SCUP is your solution, right? Do you need to manage a scenario that's not yet supported by Config Manager? SCUP's your answer, right? Do you need to use SCUP and third-party update integration in Config Manager simultaneously? Depending on the answer to the previous questions, maybe so. The good news here, fully supported, right? So let me give you an example. Maybe one scenario, right? So if you want to leverage Config Manager third-party update integration to publish and manage your signing certs and also your client settings, certs and GPO, but leverage SCUP for the finite control over what gets published and avoiding the larger catalog list, man, that's totally supported. No problem at all, right? Go and be successful. The last one, authoring of custom updates and catalogs. So this is something that you absolutely need to use SCUP for. There is no authoring in the Config Manager console. SCUP is a topic unto itself, and actually well beyond the scope of this, but I just mentioned it, or mention it to tell you, hey, there's value here, and don't be afraid to use SCUP, right? Totally supported. So let's do a couple more demos, and then we'll start winding down. So here, I want to show you importing custom catalogs and then publishing and deploying updates. So let me pull back in the site server for this. All right, and now just a couple of things. Really, and I've kind of told you this a couple of times, I'll just say it again. Any catalog that you import into Config Manager really does need to adhere to the new format, because there can be challenges with using an older format. I'm using an older format here specifically to call out that kind of challenge that you might see, right? So we fully do allow importing the legacy catalog formats, not blocked. There can be issues, right? So let me show you how you do this. So if I go into my third-party software update catalogs and add a custom catalog, basically what I need to do is I need to supply some information. So I've already done this, and so I'm just going to supply enough to get past this. So you're going to put in a URL that's supplied, right? You're going to say who the publisher is. So this, okay, Adobe, right? And then you're going to give it a name, and then you're going to give it a description, right? Then you're going to go through, and it's going to go download and make available that catalog. So I've already done that with Adobe, and it's here, and I have subscribed to it. So similar process. I'm going to go through and I'm going to subscribe to the catalog. The wizard looks very much the same, right? I'm going to go download it, and it's going to go through the process. I'm successful. I'm going to look at the certificates. I've got to view it. There's one that pops up, right? And I'm going to hit this and go forward. I'm going to stop here. Now here's one thing that you should look at immediately if you're using a legacy formatted catalog, right? And that is go into administration and look at your certificates for Adobe. So what you see here is that there are five Adobe certificates that have been imported. Every single one of these certificates were imported blocked, right? And so I'm not able to do anything further with any of these updates until I resolve these blocked certificates. Now, you see that I've actually unblocked a couple of them, right? And I'll show you a little bit about this, how you get here. I wanted to go ahead and show you this because after you import the catalog, just make it a habit. Come here, where these certificates blocked. Before you can do anything further, you're going to have to unblock those certificates, right? Okay, so let me show you kind of the experience. So if I go to Software Library, third-party updates, and I choose vendor of Adobe, right? So vendor, add, Adobe, search. So these are the Adobe updates. They're here, no problem. You see that I've actually scanned a little bit. I see one system that needs this reader 10.0.1. Actually, you see the third update in the list. I've already installed this on a test system getting ready for this discussion, and this one I haven't, so it's still needed. But either way, I'll show you this one installing. Even though it says it's already installed, my client, I've uninstalled it, so it still actually needs it. You'll see it install in just a minute. Again, the icons are your friends here. Green, ready to go and deploy. Metadata only, no, ready to go, ready to deploy, right? So here's the deal. If I go and I try to publish, let's just see if I get lucky, publish a third-party update here, same deal. I'm going to have to go check the ISV log and see if, in fact, I can see this thing published successfully. So let's go down. And I don't know whether this one will successfully publish or not. Let's just open it and see if the lines will show up fairly quickly and tell me that in fact it was published successfully. I'll open it in Notepad too, just to see the current status. Open in Notepad and go down. Okay, so it looks like there, it's just starting. Okay, cool. So I'm going to capture all of it up here. So synchronizing, I'm downloading that update. Take a second. Here's the job, and here's the update ID, and all of the stuff that's relevant to know. So progressing, and I'm downloading the update, and let's just see if it's able to successfully publish, right? And you need to monitor here to make sure. Okay, so just a couple more bullets, lines, and it will be done. 90%, 96%, let's see what it does. All right, signature check on the downloaded policies complete. WSUS, so calling WSUS to see if WSUS will allow us to actually add that. Okay, so it looks like I got lucky, and this one actually did publish. And it's probably because it's using one of those two certs that I've unblocked, so it worked out no problem. But let's just assume that it did not publish here, right? How would I go about understanding why? So one of the nice places, I usually personally don't go to status messages. There's a really nice set of status messages here for third-party update publishing. So if I go under system status and component status and look for ISV, okay, ISV. So the component's fine, but if I go and show messages all from, I don't know, let's say a week ago, 1 week ago, I should hit what I'm looking for. Yeah, I did, right? So there were some failures that were happening when I was trying to publish. So you can see just by highlighting, hey, failed to publish content, shows you the update ID. If I go to the very next line, it's going to tell me the particular details, that it was an Adobe Systems update. It's going to, again, tell me the update ID. And then down near the bottom, it gives me a certificate hash or a certificate thumbprint ID and basically says, hey, I can't publish this because that certificate is not approved, right? So that's where it's a 916, whatever that was, 9163, whatever. So that's where I went into my certificates node and found my Adobe, it's got to be one of these that I unblocked the startup here, found my Adobe cert that was being referenced there and unblocked it, approved it essentially. Yeah, 9163, this one. So that's where I just went and said, hey, okay, great, go ahead and unblock it, right? And I did the same here. So these, for any updates that require these certs, it will still be blocked, right? But I'm good here, right? Because this is an update that is fully okay now because that certificate has been unblocked. Now, from here, all I need to do is go through and deploy this as normal. There's nothing different about the deployment process of this at all. So I'm going to add this in, just do a search again. And the one that I'm going to show you that I've deployed is this one, right? And so it's green. I've got a deployment for it. Actually, through the software update group, there's an Adobe software update group. So I'm going to move in my test client at this stage and bring up Software Center and let you guys see that it works perfectly well, right? So Software Center, and you see I have Adobe on the system on purpose, right? So I have Reader sitting here in Software Center, and I'm just going to click install. This is a older, slower kind of VM here, so it's on a disk that's kind of busy. So it's going to take several minutes, and I'll probably just pause here and wait for it to complete. But once you see it complete, the whole reason this is able to work is because the signing certificates are trusted in the certificate store on the system, as I showed you earlier, and also the GPO settings are enabled to allow for that to take place, right? So let's wait for that to finish, and then we'll keep going. Okay, installed. So glad I paused the video. It did take a little bit for it to do it. Told you it's a little bit of an older or slower VM, but either way, installed just like normal, right? No difference at all in the process. Let's go ahead and pull that VM out of the way, and also pull that out of the way and move on, right? Start to wrap up. So troubleshooting tips and tricks. We've already talked about these kind of as we have gone through this, so I'll just kind of talk about them again here just as a summary. So status messages, right? The ISV component status messages. If you're wanting to check why publication didn't work or something like that, that's a really good source to be able to get the information. The logs too, right? So the server logs patch downloader will download third-party catalogs. It will show that communication as it's pulling from WSUS and checking certs and doing that kind of thing, so good there. The ISV update sync agent log, so this is acquiring your third-party update, publishing to WSUS the WSync MGR log. Any activity related to publishing and maintaining the WSUS signing certificate will be logged there, plus just your normal software update sync activity is always there too. The WCM.log, you saw that it shows that it's validating WSUS using SSL. I don't know if it will persist that. Don't know. Haven't checked. But at least you saw it here. In terms of the client logs, the updates deployment log may show you some interesting things. It looked like it rolled out for me, but certainly just standard update troubleshooting. Once it gets to the client side, you'll be able to see why things aren't installing and so on. And also, so those are logs, right? So the ISV temp, this is the Microsoft Config Manager ISV temp location. This is the location where downloading third-party catalogs are stored temporarily, extracted, and so on. A word about this too. So one of the things during publication I didn't call out, but I should have, and really important. So in that publication process, you saw me right-click on an update. I just did one at a time. You can multi-select and publish updates if you want to. Here's the challenge. Try to avoid just bulk publishing, proactively publishing updates that you know that you don't know that you need. What that can actually cause some queuing up of a lot of work on the site server. And in some cases, it might actually run you out of hard drive space. On big hard drives shouldn't really be an issue, right? But just be aware of that. Publish the ones that you need. And remember, publishing in the sense of third-party update integration means grabbing the content, unpacking the content, publishing the content over to WSUS, changing that metadata only flag from yes to no, right? So I wanted to mention that there. Certificates. So we talked about the certificates that are required. Updates will fail to publish if certificates aren't what they need to be. So there's actually two big places where you need to be aware of certificates. That's first, on the server and the client, the WSUS signing certificate needs to be in place in the proper stores that we talked about. And then also the certificates from the vendor supplied catalogs need to be unblocked and able to be used in order for publication to work, right? Otherwise you may see problems, will see problems in publishing. The registry, so I showed you where you can actually validate the port number and SSL settings for systems. There's one I didn't show you that I'll just quickly show you here. Let me go back to my site and open up regedit. So for ISV, the ISV sync agent, there's it's just a component of the executive, as I mentioned. Let's go down to SMS here and components, and then the ISV update sync agent. So this will just give you a little bit of detail about last catalog sync time and different other things that might be useful in a troubleshooting scenario. So just showing it to you, right? WMI, so I showed you the namespace where you can validate that the client is enabled for third-party updates. And then finally GPO settings. So I showed you those as well. So all of those can be very useful for troubleshooting. In terms of tips and tricks, there are just a couple of things. So the third-party custom update catalog mentioned these. Legacy catalogs are not blocked. You saw me import the Adobe catalog. Experiences may vary. Definitely recommend using the updated format, but just calling that out. In terms of just practical comments about third-party updating in the enterprise, right? So enterprises use Config Manager heavily to ensure systems are maintained with the latest updates. A lot of processes that have been built around that. But lots of times the third-party or custom software is left either unchecked or managed by a different process, right? Hopefully it's not unchecked. Hopefully it's managed some way. But by leveraging the third-party update management process we've discussed here and also bringing in to bear tools like SCUP, really does give you the ability to manage end-to-end all of your software update scenarios using very familiar, well-proven processes that enterprises of all sizes depend on every single month to keep themselves up to date. One challenge, you may want to use this and you don't see a catalog available for the vendor that you work with or really is important to you. Man, if that's the case, just go encourage your vendor to adopt this format and make their catalog available for Config Manager, right? Love to see the list of catalogs just increase and become more prolific. And then the other thing, I already kind of mentioned it, only publish the updates you need. Proactive publishing will queue up additional work on the site, right? So I didn't forget to mention it, I just hadn't gotten to it yet. But anyway, I mentioned it twice, so hopefully good to go. Okay, so in terms of icons, right, talked about, pay attention to these things. They are not just there as little icons, they actually mean something, right? You want a green icon. If it's not green, then the update's not ready to deploy, right? Metadata. So third-party updates can be published as metadata only or with full content. What that means in the Config Manager console is that when you import a catalog, all of the updates in that catalog are imported and published as metadata only. You get the full content whenever you publish the content in the console, right? So just make sure the metadata only flag is changed to no if that's what you want. And then finally, System Center Updates Publisher, again, there's still a need for it depending on the scenario. Don't be afraid to use it. where it can benefit you. And with that said, that's really all I had for the session today. Hopefully makes sense now, the ability to use third-party update integration. So we'll wrap it here. We'll see you next time.